The Stranger Who Saved a Family. At 2:17 a.m., while a violent winter storm was tearing through the mountains of West Virginia, someone knocked 3 times on the front door of the Carter family's house. Daniel Carter woke first. He did not know why. There was no loud thunder at that exact moment. No car had pulled into the driveway. Nothing had crashed against the house. Yet Daniel suddenly opened his eyes and stared into the darkness of his bedroom as if someone had whispered his name. Beside him, his wife Emily was sleeping. Down the hallway, their 12-year-old daughter Sophie was asleep in her room. Their 8-year-old son Noah was in the room next to hers. Daniel reached for his phone. 2:17 a.m. Then came the knocking. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Daniel sat up. For several seconds, he simply listened. The storm outside was enormous. Wind pushed against the windows. Rain struck the glass so hard that it sounded like handfuls of gravel being thrown against the house. He looked at Emily. She was still asleep. Another 3 knocks came from downstairs. Daniel got out of bed. He walked quietly toward the bedroom door. Then he heard something that made him stop. A man's voice came from the other side of the front door. "Mr. Carter?" Daniel's heart began beating faster. He did not recognize the voice. "Mr. Carter, please don't turn on the lights." Daniel stood completely still. The voice came again. "If you want your family to survive tonight, you need to listen to me." Daniel's hand moved toward the bedroom doorknob. He froze. There was something strange about the man's voice. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't threatening Daniel. He sounded terrified. Daniel quietly woke Emily. "Emily." She opened her eyes. "What?" "Don't make any noise." Her expression changed immediately. "What happened?" "Someone is downstairs." Emily sat up. "What?" Daniel placed a finger against his lips. Then the stranger spoke again from downstairs. "Daniel, I know you don't know me." A pause. "But your wife does." Emily's face went white. Daniel looked at her. "What does that mean?" Emily didn't answer. The stranger continued. "Mrs. Carter, 6 years ago, you signed a hospital discharge form for a little girl named Lily." Emily covered her mouth. Daniel felt a chill run through him. He had never heard the name Lily. The stranger continued. "That girl was not supposed to leave that hospital alive." Emily began shaking. "Daniel, what is he talking about?" She looked at him with tears forming in her eyes. "I don't know." Then the stranger said something that changed everything. "Daniel, there's a gas leak underneath your kitchen." Daniel stopped. "Don't turn on anything electrical." He looked toward the hallway. The stranger continued. "Do not use the stairs." Daniel's eyes widened. "Why?" "Because the gas isn't the only thing inside your house." Silence. Then, a soft, metallic sound came from downstairs. Click. Daniel knew that sound. Someone had just tried the back door. Emily grabbed his arm. "Daniel." He looked toward the hallway. "Stay here." "No." "Stay with the kids." "But..." "Whatever happens, don't open the bedroom door." Daniel moved silently toward the closet. He opened it and pulled out the old baseball bat he kept there. He wasn't a hero. He had never been in a fight in his adult life. He was a high school history teacher who spent most of his days teaching American history to teenagers who cared more about their phones than the Civil War. But that night, something inside him changed. He opened the bedroom window a few inches. The hallway was dark. He could hear the storm. He could hear Emily breathing behind him. And then he heard another sound. Footsteps. Someone was walking downstairs. Daniel slowly closed the bedroom door. The stranger outside shouted, "Daniel, don't go downstairs!" Too late. The footsteps stopped. Then a man's voice came from below. "Daniel?" It wasn't the stranger. It was someone else. A familiar voice. Daniel's blood turned cold. He knew that voice. It belonged to his older brother Michael. But Michael had been dead for 11 years. Daniel stepped backward. Emily whispered, "What is it?" Daniel stared at the door. Nothing. Outside, the stranger shouted again, "He's using your brother's voice!" Daniel's stomach dropped. "Do you hear me?" the stranger yelled. "He's using your brother's voice because he knows you'll come downstairs." Then the lights flickered, once, twice, and went out. The entire house disappeared into darkness. Sophie screamed from her bedroom. Noah began crying. Daniel ran into the hallway. "Kids! Dad! I'm coming!" He reached Sophie's room first. She was sitting on her bed, terrified. "Where's Noah?" "I don't know." Daniel turned. "Noah?" A small voice answered from the hallway. "Dad?" Daniel saw his son standing at the end of the corridor. "Come here!" Noah ran towards him. Daniel grabbed him. Then he noticed something. Noah wasn't wearing shoes, and there was mud on his feet. Daniel looked down. There was mud all over the hallway floor. But the strange thing was that the mud was not coming from the front door. It was coming from inside the house. Someone had already been there. Daniel pulled both children into Sophie's bedroom. Emily joined them. Then all four of them heard something beneath the floor, a deep metallic vibration. The stranger's voice came from outside. "Mr. Carter, you have about 6 minutes." "6 minutes for what?" Daniel shouted. "For the gas to reach the furnace." Daniel looked at Emily. "How does he know that?" The stranger answered before Emily could. "Because I installed the system." Daniel's blood ran cold. "What system?" Silence. Then, "The one beneath your house." Daniel stared at the floor. The Carter family had bought the house 3 years earlier. It had been built in 1958. The previous owner was an elderly man named Harold Bennett, who had lived there for almost 40 years. The house had been inspected. The wiring had been inspected. The foundation had been inspected. Nothing unusual had been discovered. But suddenly, Daniel realized something. Harold Bennett had died less than a month before selling the house, and the man who handled the sale had told Daniel something strange. Mr. Bennett never liked strangers. At the time, Daniel had laughed. Now he wondered what that sentence had really meant. The stranger outside shouted, "Mr. Carter, I need you to trust me." Daniel opened the bedroom window. Cold rain blew inside. He looked down. The stranger stood near the front gate. He was wearing a dark coat. His face was hidden beneath the hood. "Who are you?" Daniel shouted. The man looked up. "My name is Samuel." "Samuel what?" "Just Samuel." Daniel almost laughed. "This is insane." Samuel looked toward the house. "No, what's happening inside your house is insane." Suddenly, the basement door slammed open. Everyone screamed. A man stepped into the hallway. Daniel grabbed the baseball bat. The figure slowly walked towards them. Then he stopped. He could barely see his face. The man raised his head. Daniel. Daniel's blood turned cold. It was his brother Michael. Same face, same eyes, same scar above his eyebrow, same voice. "Michael?" Emily screamed. Samuel shouted from outside, "Don't believe him!" The figure smiled. And then Daniel noticed something. Michael's eyes were completely black. Not dark, not shadowed. Black.
like empty holes. Daniel stepped backward. The figure smiled wider. "You always were afraid of me, little brother." Daniel couldn't move. Michael had died in a car accident when Daniel was 21. He had identified his body. He had attended the funeral. He had watched the coffin being lowered into the ground. It was impossible. But there he stood, Michael, 11 years later. The stranger Samuel screamed, "Get away from him!" The figure suddenly moved. Too fast. It crossed half the hallway in an instant. Daniel swung the baseball bat. The bat hit the wall. The figure was gone. A second later, something slammed against the bedroom door. Emily screamed. Daniel pushed the children behind the bed. Then the stranger outside shouted, "Open the front door!" Daniel stared at him through the rain. "What?" "Open the front door and get everyone outside." "But there's someone inside." "I know." "Who is he?" Samuel looked directly at Daniel. Then he said, "The man inside your house isn't your brother." A pause. "He's the reason your brother died." Daniel's entire world seemed to stop. The house shook. A window shattered downstairs. Samuel shouted again, "Daniel, you have 4 minutes!" Daniel grabbed Emily's hand. "Kids, stay behind me." They ran. They did not go downstairs. Instead, Daniel led them toward the second-floor emergency window. He remembered the fire escape. The previous owner had installed it decades earlier. He had always thought it was strange. Now it might save their lives. Daniel opened the window. Sophie climbed out first. Noah followed. Emily went next. Daniel climbed last. They reached the ground just as a tremendous explosion erupted inside the house. The windows blew outwards. Flames shot through the roof. Daniel fell to the ground. Emily screamed. The children cried. Samuel ran towards them. "Everyone okay?" Daniel looked at him. "Who are you?" Samuel didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the burning house.
"You're lucky." Daniel stood. "My family could have died." "I know. Who are you?" Samuel finally looked at him, and Daniel saw something in the stranger's eyes. Pain, not fear, not guilt. Pain. Samuel whispered, "I've been trying to save your family for 22 years. Daniel stared at him. 22? Samuel nodded. "Long before you ever met your wife." Then he said something that Daniel would spend the rest of his life trying to understand. "Your family wasn't chosen because someone wanted to kill you." Samuel looked at the burning house. "Your family was chosen because someone wanted to erase the truth." And that was the beginning of the Carter family's nightmare. The fire department arrived 11 minutes later. By then, the entire second floor was burning. The local sheriff, Robert Hayes, arrived shortly afterward. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s who had known Daniel for years. He approached Daniel. "Everyone alive?" Daniel nodded. "Who is this?" He pointed toward Samuel. Samuel had disappeared. Daniel turned. The stranger was gone. There were no footprints in the mud, no car, no tracks, nothing. Sheriff Hayes frowned. "You sure there was someone?" Daniel looked at the burning house. "Yes." "What did he look like?" "Mid-40s, dark coat, hood, name?" "Samuel." "Last name?" "I don't know." Sheriff Hayes looked at Emily. "Did you know him?" Emily shook her head. "No." Daniel stared at her. She avoided his eyes. That was when Daniel realized something. His wife knew more than she had admitted. Much more. The fire department eventually contained the blaze. The investigators later determined that the fire had started in the basement. The official report described it as an electrical malfunction, but Daniel knew better. There had been no electrical malfunction. There had been gas, and someone had deliberately released it. 3 days later, the police found something inside the basement, a hidden metal door. Behind it was a narrow concrete staircase. The staircase led underground. Nobody in the Carter family knew it existed. Sheriff Hayes stood beside Daniel as the investigators opened the door. "You ever see this before?" Daniel shook his head. "No." The sheriff looked at the staircase. "Then we're going down." Daniel followed. At the bottom was a room. It was almost perfectly preserved. There were old filing cabinets, boxes, photographs, maps, medical records, newspaper clippings, and on one wall were dozens of photographs. Daniel stepped closer. His face went pale. Every photograph was of his family. There was one of him at age 6, one of his father, one of his mother, one of Michael, one of Emily, one of Sophie when she was born, one of Noah. The photographs had dates written underneath them. Some were decades old, some were only weeks old. Sheriff Hayes whispered, "Someone has been watching your family for a very long time." Daniel walked toward a table. There was a folder. His name was written on it, Daniel Carter. He opened it. Inside was a document dated 22 years earlier. At the bottom was a signature, Thomas Reed. Daniel remembered the name. The stranger had mentioned it, Thomas Reed. Daniel looked at Emily. "Who is he?" Emily began crying. "I was going to tell you." "When?" "I don't know." "Emily," she covered her face. "I worked at St. Vincent's Hospital." "I know, 22 years ago." Daniel waited. "There was a baby." "Whose baby?" Emily looked at him. "Yours." Daniel felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath him. "What?" Emily whispered. "Your family had another child." Daniel stared at her. "No." "Yes, that's impossible." "I know. What are you talking about?" Emily opened the folder. Inside was a photograph, a newborn baby. On the back were 4 words, Baby Carter, Twin A. Daniel's hands began shaking. "Where is Twin B?" Emily didn't answer. The sheriff looked at her. "Mrs. Carter?" she whispered. "Dead." Daniel stared at the photograph. Then he noticed something. The baby's wristband. There was a name written on it, Lily. Daniel remembered the stranger's words. 6 years ago, you signed a hospital discharge form for a little girl named Lily. But Daniel had never had a daughter named Lily. At least, that's what he had believed. Emily looked at him. "Daniel, I need you to understand something." "What?" "The child didn't die." Daniel looked at her. "Then where is she?" Emily's voice broke. "I don't know." A sound came from the darkness behind them. A man's voice. "You do." Everyone turned. Samuel stood at the bottom of the staircase. He had returned. Sheriff Hayes pulled his weapon. "Don't move." Samuel raised his hands. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." Daniel stepped forward. "Who is Lily?" Samuel looked at him. Then he said, "Your daughter." Daniel stopped breathing. "No, she was taken from the hospital 22 years ago." Emily shook her head. "That's impossible." Samuel looked at her. "You were there." Emily began crying. "You signed the papers." "I was 23. "You were a nurse." "I didn't know." "You knew enough." Emily looked at Daniel. "I thought she was dead." Samuel shook his head. "She was never dead." Daniel's voice trembled. "Where is she?" Samuel looked toward the photographs. "Closer than you think." Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the burned house, a woman was watching. Her name was Lily Carter. She had spent 22 years believing she had no family. She had spent her entire life searching for the people who had abandoned her, and she had no idea that the man she had been trying to find was her father. But the greatest secret was not that Lily was alive. The greatest secret was why someone had stolen her. Because Lily Carter had been born with something that powerful people had spent decades trying to hide. Not money, not a fortune, not a secret inheritance, something far more dangerous. She had information that could expose one of the largest medical fraud schemes in American history. And the stranger who saved the Carter family was the only person alive who knew where the original evidence was hidden. But Samuel had one problem. The people hunting Lily had already found him, and they were coming for the Carter family next. The following morning, Daniel woke up in a motel room 20 miles away. His house was gone. His possessions were gone. His normal life was gone. But his family was alive. Sophie sat beside the window. Noah was asleep beside Emily. Sheriff Hayes stood near the door. Samuel sat in a chair. Daniel looked at him. "You owe me answers." Samuel nodded. "I know. Start with Lily." Samuel took a deep breath. 22 years ago, your parents discovered something. "My parents?" "Yes." "What?" "Your father was an accountant." "I know. He worked for a company called Meridian Health Systems." Daniel frowned. "I've heard of them." "At the time, they operated several hospitals across the country." "What did my father discover?" "Medicare fraud." Daniel stared at him. Samuel continued. "Not ordinary fraud. Billions of dollars." The room went silent. Fake patients, fake surgeries, false diagnoses, payments to doctors, bribes to administrators. Insurance companies were being charged for procedures that never happened. Daniel listened. "Your father discovered that the company had created a network of shell organizations. Why didn't he go to the police?" "He tried." Samuel paused. "That's when things went wrong." Daniel looked at him.
What happened? Your father disappeared. Daniel shook his head. He died in a car accident. That's what they told you. Daniel's face hardened. You mean it wasn't an accident? Samuel shook his head. Neither was your brother's. Daniel stood. What? Samuel looked at him. Your brother Michael was investigating the same people. Daniel felt sick. Michael was 24. He was older than you thought. What does that mean? He knew what happened to your father. Daniel sat down.
Why didn't he tell me? Because he believed someone inside your family was working for them. Daniel looked toward Emily. Samuel said nothing. Daniel slowly turned toward his wife. Emily looked away. Emily? She began crying. I didn't know. Samuel said, You knew about Lily. Emily whispered, I knew she existed. Why didn't you tell Daniel? Because I was threatened. By whom? Emily looked at Samuel. Thomas Reed. Daniel recognized the name. Who is Thomas Reed? Samuel answered, the man who created Meridian Health's underground network. Daniel stared at him. He's alive? Samuel nodded, and he's been searching for Lily for 22 years. Daniel asked, why? Samuel looked at him. Because Lily has the original evidence. What evidence? A recording. What recording? Samuel leaned forward. One conversation. Between whom? Thomas Reed and the governor of West Virginia. Daniel's eyes widened. When? 22 years ago. What did they say? Samuel looked toward the window. They discussed the deaths of 17 people. Silence. Patients? No. Doctors? No. Then who? Samuel looked directly at Daniel. Whistleblowers. The room went silent. Samuel continued. Those 17 people had discovered the fraud. Daniel felt a knot form in his stomach. How did Lily get the recording? She didn't. Then why is she the key? Because the recording was hidden inside something that belonged to her. What? Samuel looked at him. A music box. Daniel remembered something. Emily had once owned an old wooden music box. She had kept it for years. Daniel had never known why. Where is it? Emily looked terrified. Daniel! Where is it? I gave it away. To whom? She whispered, Lily. Daniel stared at her. When? 6 years ago. How did you find her? I didn't. Then who did? Emily looked at Samuel. Samuel closed his eyes. I did. Daniel finally understood. The stranger hadn't randomly appeared at his house. He'd been watching them, protecting them, waiting for 22 years. But Daniel still had one question. Why did you save us? Samuel looked at him, and for the first time, the stranger's expression completely broke. Because I was the one who took Lily. Daniel stood. What? Samuel's voice became almost inaudible. I was the man who carried your daughter out of that hospital. Daniel moved toward him. You stole my daughter. I saved her. You stole my daughter. I saved her from being killed. Daniel grabbed Samuel by the collar. Sheriff Hayes stepped forward. Daniel. Samuel didn't resist. I know what I did. You ruined my family. I know. You made us believe she was dead. I know. Where was she? Samuel closed his eyes. With my sister. Where? Ohio. Daniel froze. She grew up believing I was her father. Does she know? No. Does she know she's a Carter? No. Daniel released him. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Samuel said, There's something else. Daniel looked at him. Thomas Reed isn't searching for the recording. What is he searching for? Lily. Why? Because she isn't the only one who knows where it is. Who else? Samuel looked toward Noah. Daniel immediately stepped in front of his son. No. Samuel shook his head. Not Noah. He looked at Sophie. Daniel's heart stopped. Sophie? Samuel nodded. Your daughter has the same birthmark as Lily. Daniel didn't understand. What does that mean? Samuel answered. It means the people who took Lily believed the genetic information could lead them to the original research. Daniel stared at Sophie. She had been listening. What research? Samuel answered. The company was experimenting with a way to predict certain diseases before symptoms appeared. Daniel frowned. That's not illegal. No. Samuel paused. But they weren't just predicting diseases. What were they doing? Manipulating genetic data. Daniel stared at him. They were testing on children. Emily covered her mouth. Samuel continued. Children from poor families, foster homes, uninsured patients. Daniel felt sick. Lily was one of them? She was born during one of the experimental programs. Why did they want her? Because she survived. Survived what? Samuel's voice became quiet. A procedure that was supposed to be fatal. Daniel looked at Sophie, then at Noah, then at Emily. The stranger's final words that night came slowly. And now they know that your daughter may carry the same genetic marker. Outside the motel, an engine started. Sheriff Hayes looked toward the window. A black SUV was parked across the street. Then another appeared. Samuel stood. They found us. Daniel looked at his family. What do we do? Samuel answered, run. They left through the back entrance. They crossed an alley. They reached an old pickup truck. Sheriff Hayes drove. Daniel sat beside Emily. Samuel sat in the back with the children. The SUVs followed. The chase continued for 23 miles. They eventually reached an abandoned mining town. Samuel led them into an old warehouse. Inside was a tunnel. Daniel looked at him. Where does this go? To the old railway. Why? Because the people hunting us control the roads. They entered the tunnel. For nearly an hour they walked underground. At the end was a small cabin. Inside were blankets, canned food, water, medical supplies, and radio equipment. Samuel had prepared everything. Daniel looked around. How long have you been planning this? Samuel answered, since the day Lily was born. Daniel stared at him. 22 years. The stranger had spent his entire life preparing for this night, not for revenge, not for money, for one family. And that was when Daniel finally understood something. The stranger had not saved them because he was fearless. He had saved them because he had spent his entire life afraid. Afraid that one day the people he had betrayed would find him. Afraid that Lily would discover the truth. Afraid that the Carter family would never forgive him. But most of all, he was afraid he would die before he could finally tell them everything. That night, Samuel opened an old metal box. Inside was a cassette tape. Daniel looked at it. What is that? The original recording. Daniel stared. You said Lily had it. I lied. Why? Because if Thomas Reed knew I had it, he'd kill everyone. Samuel placed the tape on the table. This is the reason your family has been hunted for 22 years. Daniel looked at the cassette. There was handwriting on it. A date, March 14th, 2004. Samuel pressed play. Static filled the room. Then a voice appeared. Thomas Reed. We can't let the board know. Another voice answered. 17 people are dead. They knew the risks. What about the children? They are assets. Daniel closed his eyes. Emily began crying. The recording continued. They don't have names in the system. Then give them numbers. The tape crackled. A third voice spoke. One of the babies survived. Silence. Thomas Reed answered. Find her. The tape ended. Daniel stared at Samuel. Who recorded this? Samuel looked at him. Your brother Michael. Daniel couldn't speak. Michael had not died by accident. He had died because he had recorded the truth, and before he died, he hid the tape. Samuel continued. Michael gave it to me. Why? Because he knew he was going to die. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. What were his last words? Samuel looked away. He said, if you ever meet my brother, tell him I was sorry. Daniel sat down. For the first time in 11 years, he cried for his brother. Not because he missed him, because he finally understood him. The following day, Samuel took them to Ohio. They found Lily living in a small town outside Columbus. She was 22. She worked at a veterinary clinic. She loved old books. She hated thunderstorms, and she had a habit of tapping her fingers whenever she was nervous. Daniel watched her from across the street. He had never met her, but he knew. A father knows, even when the world tells him otherwise. Lily stepped outside the clinic. She looked toward Daniel. For a moment, neither moved. Then she touched her neck. She was wearing a small wooden pendant. Daniel recognized it immediately. The music box. He walked toward her. "Are you Lily?" She looked confused. "Yes." "My name is Daniel." She smiled politely. "Do I know you?" Daniel couldn't answer. Samuel stood behind him. Emily was crying. Lily looked at her. "Who is she?" Daniel took a breath. "Your mother." Lily's face changed. She stepped backward. "No!" Emily whispered, "I'm sorry." Lily shook her head. "No!" She looked at Daniel. "Who are you?" Daniel said, "Your father." The world went silent. Lily stared at him. Then she laughed, a nervous, broken laugh. "That's not funny." "I know." "Who sent you?" "No one." "Why are you doing this?" Daniel reached into his pocket. He pulled out the old photograph. Lily looked at it. Her face went pale. The baby in the photograph had the same small mark beneath her left ear, the same mark Lily had. She touched it. "Where did you get this?" Daniel answered, "From the house where I grew up." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Why didn't you find me?" Daniel couldn't lie. "Because I thought you were dead." Lily looked at Emily. "Did you know?" Emily nodded. "Not at first." "When?" 6 years ago." Lily stepped backward. 6 years? "I tried to find you."
The Stranger Who Saved a Family, Part 3. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Daniel stared at the screen. Sophie Carter. The name appeared beneath the words. Secondary subject. Active. He read it again. Then again. His mind refused to accept it. Sophie was 12 years old when the stranger first appeared at their house. She had never been inside the old hospital. She had never met Thomas Reed. She had never been part of any experiment. At least, that was what Daniel believed. Thomas Reed slowly walked toward the screen. "Now you understand." Daniel stepped between Thomas and Lily. "You stay away from my daughter." Thomas smiled. "Which daughter?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Both of them." Thomas looked at Lily. Anna was the beginning. Then he looked at Daniel. "Sophie is the future." Emily suddenly stepped forward. "What did you do to my daughter?" Thomas looked at her. "Nothing." "You're lying." "No." He smiled. "That's the interesting part." Thomas pointed toward the screen. "We didn't create Sophie's condition." Daniel froze. "Condition?" Thomas nodded. "We discovered it." Daniel looked at Lily. She looked equally confused. Thomas continued. "Sophie was born with the same genetic marker as Anna." Daniel shook his head. "No." "Yes." "You're lying." "You can believe whatever you want." Thomas walked toward another monitor. He pressed a button. A video appeared. It showed Sophie, not as she was now, as a baby. Daniel stared at the screen. The footage had been recorded inside a hospital. Sophie was only a few days old. Emily was standing beside her. Daniel was nowhere in the room. Then a nurse entered. She took blood from Sophie. Daniel recognized the nurse. It was Emily's younger sister, Rachel. Daniel turned toward Emily. "You told me Rachel died." Emily closed her eyes. "She didn't." Thomas smiled. "Your family has always been very good at keeping secrets." Daniel felt sick. "Where is Rachel?" Thomas didn't answer. Instead, the screen changed. A medical report appeared. Sophie Carter. Genetic marker match. 99.7%. Lily Carter. Genetic marker match. 99.8%. Thomas said. "They are nearly identical." Daniel stared at him. "What are you trying to do?" "Nothing." "Then why are you here?" Thomas smiled. "Because I need Lily to unlock the archive." "What archive?" "The one you never found." Daniel looked at Samuel's old documents. "We found the archive." Thomas laughed. "No. You said the archive was under the hospital."
I said there was an archive. He leaned closer. You found the storage room. Daniel's blood went cold. The real archive is beneath it. Thomas pressed another button. The floor beneath them vibrated. A deep mechanical sound rolled through the building. Emily whispered, "There's another level." Thomas nodded. 7 floors underground. Daniel stared at him. 7? Built in 2001. Why? Because your father was afraid someone would find it. Daniel remembered his father, a quiet accountant, a man who had supposedly died in an accident. Thomas smiled. Your father built the first level. Daniel couldn't speak. He was not merely an accountant. Thomas continued. Your father was one of the architects of Project Echo. Daniel shook his head. No. Yes. You're lying. Ask yourself why he always had access to hospitals. Daniel remembered his childhood. His father had traveled constantly. He had always said he was auditing hospitals. Daniel had never questioned it. Thomas looked at Lily. Your grandfather created the money. Then he looked at Daniel. Your father created the system. Then he looked toward Sophie. And you? Thomas smiled. You were born to complete it. Suddenly the lights went out. Gunfire echoed from somewhere below. Thomas turned. His expression changed. He's here. Daniel knew immediately. Samuel? Thomas looked at him. For the first time, the smile disappeared. Yes. A metal door exploded open. Smoke filled the hallway. A figure stepped through. Samuel. But he was not alone. Behind him were 3 people. 2 men and a woman, all wearing dark tactical clothing. Samuel shouted, Daniel! Daniel grabbed Lily. Where's Sophie? Samuel looked at the screen. His face went pale. She's at home. Daniel froze. What? Samuel shook his head. No. What? That message wasn't showing her current location. Then what was it? Samuel looked at Thomas. It's showing where she will be. Thomas smiled. Exactly. Daniel stared at him. Where are you taking my daughter? Thomas answered. Exactly where she needs to be. Daniel felt his stomach drop. He pulled out his phone. He called Sophie. No answer. He called again. Nothing. Then Emily's phone rang. She answered. It was Sophie. Mom? Emily began crying. Sophie, where are you? Silence. Then Sophie whispered, I'm in the car. Emily looked at Daniel. Who are you with? Another silence. Then a man's voice answered, Your daughter is safe. Daniel recognized it. Thomas. But Thomas was standing directly before them. Daniel looked at the phone. Then at Thomas. Then at Samuel. Samuel whispered, He's using a relay. Daniel understood. Thomas had another team. And they already had Sophie. Daniel shouted, Where is my daughter? Thomas smiled. Exactly where she needs to be. Samuel stepped forward. Thomas, this ends tonight. Thomas laughed. You've been saying that for 22 years. Samuel's face hardened. You won't get her. Thomas looked at him. You already gave me Lily. Samuel shook his head. No. Thomas pointed toward Daniel. His family. Samuel raised his weapon. Thomas smiled. Go ahead. Samuel hesitated. Thomas whispered, You know what happens if I die. Samuel lowered his weapon.
Daniel looked at him. "What does he mean?" Samuel didn't answer. Thomas did. "He has the activation key." Daniel stared. "What key?" Thomas looked at Samuel. "The key to Project Echo." Samuel closed his eyes. Thomas said, "And without me, he can't stop it." Daniel looked at Samuel. "Is that true?" Samuel nodded. "Yes." "What happens if it activates?" Samuel looked at Sophie on the phone screen. "Every child with the genetic marker will become traceable." Daniel didn't understand. "Traceable how?" "Everywhere." Thomas smiled. "Medical records, school records, insurance, private laboratories, governments, anyone willing to pay." Daniel finally understood. This was never about medicine. It was about information, control, genetic data, a database containing the biological vulnerabilities of tens of thousands of Americans. And Project Echo had been designed to build the database. Thomas looked at Lily. "You were the first successful subject." Lily shook her head. "I'm not your subject." Thomas smiled. "You were born one." Daniel stepped forward. "She's my daughter." Thomas looked at him. "That's why you're useful." "What?" "You didn't know she was." Thomas pressed a button. A recording began playing. It was Daniel's voice, from years earlier, talking to a doctor, discussing Sophie's birth. Daniel listened. He didn't remember the conversation, but it was real. His voice, his words. Then another recording. Emily. Then Sophie.
Daniel could not move. For 27 years he had carried the memory of his father's death. He remembered the phone call. He remembered his mother collapsing in the kitchen. He remembered the funeral. He remembered standing beside a closed coffin because the body had supposedly been too badly damaged to identify. He remembered the newspaper article. Car crash claims local accountant. He remembered believing, without question, that his father was dead. Now the man on the screen was smiling at him, alive, older, calmer, and completely unafraid. "Hello, Daniel." Daniel's lips barely moved. "Dad?" The man smiled. "I was wondering how long it would take you to recognize me." Emily grabbed Daniel's arm. "Don't listen to him." Daniel couldn't look away from the screen. "Why?" His father tilted his head. "Why what?" "Why did you fake your death?" A long silence followed. Then his father answered, "Because dying was the only way to survive." Daniel laughed bitterly. "You left us. I protected you. You abandoned Mom. I saved her. You let us believe you were dead." His father's expression hardened. "You were safer believing I was dead." Daniel shouted. "Safe from what?" His father looked directly into the camera. "From me." The words silenced everyone. Even Samuel. Even Rachel. Even Lily. Daniel stared at the screen. His father continued. "I knew what Project Echo would become. You created it." "No." His father shook his head. "I created the financial structure that allowed it to exist." Daniel remembered Thomas Reed saying the same thing. His father continued. "Thomas created the science. I created the infrastructure. Together, we built something that was supposed to save millions of lives." Daniel whispered. "And instead, you destroyed thousands." His father looked down. "Yes." For the first time, he sounded tired. "I know." The countdown continued. 0132. 0131. 0130. Rachel shouted. "Daniel, we don't have time." Daniel turned. "What do we do?" Rachel pointed toward the central computer. "Sophie has to shut down the system." "How?" "Sophie knows." Daniel looked at his daughter. "Sophie?" She nodded. "I remember the sequence.
Daniel crouched beside her. Then tell me what to do. Sophie pointed toward 3 terminals. That one. Daniel ran to it. Now what? Enter 7. Daniel typed 7. Then 4. He typed 4. Then 11. Nothing happened. Sophie frowned. No. What? It changed. Rachel stepped closer. What's changed? The memory. Sophie closed her eyes. She pressed her fingers against her temple. I remember another room. What room? A white room. Where? I don't know. She opened her eyes. Under the hospital. Rachel shook her head. There isn't another level. Sophie looked at her. There is. Then she pointed toward the floor. Below this. Samuel stepped forward. Impossible. Sophie shook her head. No. She walked toward the center of the room. There is another elevator. Daniel looked around. Where? Sophie pointed toward a wall. There. It looked like solid concrete. Daniel touched it. Nothing. Then Lily noticed something. Wait. She walked toward the wall. There was a small metal plate. A symbol had been carved into it. The same symbol that appeared on her wooden pendant. She touched it. A click sounded. The wall opened. Behind it was an elevator. Everyone stared. Rachel whispered, I've been working here for 20 years. I never knew that existed. Sophie stepped inside. Daniel followed. Lily followed. Samuel stayed behind. Daniel looked at him. You're coming. He shook his head. No. Why? Because someone has to stay here. The countdown showed. 00:58. Samuel looked at Daniel. If the system reaches 0, the entire network becomes permanent. What does that mean? We'll never be able to erase it. Daniel looked at the screen. Then shut it down. Samuel smiled. I'm going to. The elevator doors closed. Daniel, Emily, Lily, Rachel, and Sophie descended. Level 8. The elevator continued. Level 9. Level 10. Daniel stared at the numbers. There shouldn't have been a level 10. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. A corridor stretched into darkness. There were photographs on the walls. Hundreds. Thousands. Every photograph was a child. Daniel walked slowly. Then he saw one. A little girl. The name beneath it. Daniel Carter. Age, 3 days. Status, removed. Daniel stopped. Beside it was another photograph. Sophie Carter. Age, 2 days. Status, retained. Daniel stared toward Rachel. What does retained mean? Rachel didn't answer. Emily did. It means they kept her. Daniel looked at her. Who? Emily began crying. Thomas. Daniel shook his head. But Sophie grew up with us. Yes. How? Emily looked at Rachel. Rachel finally answered. Because Thomas never knew we took her. Daniel stared. You stole Sophie? Rachel nodded. From the hospital. Daniel's face went white. You took my daughter? I saved her. The words echoed. Daniel remembered Samuel. The same words. I saved her. It suddenly became clear. There had been more than one person fighting Project Echo. Samuel had not been the only guardian. Rachel had been protecting Sophie. Michael had protected Lily. And Daniel's father had been protecting the secret. Everyone had been playing a different game. And Daniel had been the only person who knew nothing. He looked at Sophie. Why? Rachel answered. Because Thomas wanted to use her. For what? To create a second generation. Daniel felt sick. A second generation of what? Subjects. Sophie interrupted. I know. Everyone looked at her. She walked to the end of the corridor. There. A large steel door stood in front of them. Sophie placed her hand on it. The door opened. Inside was a room filled with old medical equipment. At the center was a glass chamber. Daniel recognized it immediately. A hospital incubator. But this one was enormous. Inside were wires, sensors, machines, and a small metal chair. Sophie stared at it. I remember this. Daniel held her hand. You were never here. Sophie looked at him. Yes, I was. How? She closed her eyes. I was 3 years old. Daniel's face changed. What happened? They brought me here. Who? Grandfather. Daniel froze. His father had brought Sophie into the facility. Why? Sophie whispered. To test whether I could remember. Daniel looked at Rachel. Rachel nodded. Because Thomas discovered that Sophie had an unusual neurological ability. What ability? She could retain memories from before normal childhood development. Daniel shook his head. Children don't remember being babies. Most don't. But Sophie does. Yes. Sophie looked at the machines. I remember everything. Daniel stared at her. Everything. She nodded. The hospital. Mom. Dad. Lily. Grandfather. And Samuel. Daniel looked at her. What do you remember about Samuel? Sophie hesitated. He wasn't the first person who saved us. Daniel's heart sank. Who was? She pointed toward the glass chamber. You were. Daniel stared at her. What? You don't remember? Rachel whispered. Because your father removed the memory. Daniel turned. What? Rachel continued. When Daniel was 27, he discovered Project Echo. I was 27. Yes. You don't remember because they used a drug. Daniel shook his head. No. Rachel nodded. They erased your memory. Daniel touched his head. Suddenly fragments appeared. A hallway. A hospital. His father shouting. Michael running. A baby crying. Thomas Reed holding a file. A gunshot. Daniel falling. Then darkness. He staggered backward. Emily grabbed him. Daniel. He closed his eyes. Another memory. He was standing beside his father. You can't do this. His father was younger. He looked terrified. Daniel, you don't understand. I know what you're doing. You're my son. You're hurting children. His father had grabbed him. You have to forget. Then the memory ended. Daniel opened his eyes. He was shaking. I remember. Emily looked at him. What? My father. What did he do? He didn't kill me. Rachel nodded. He erased you. Daniel stared. Why? Because he believed you would expose him. But why let me live? Rachel answered. Because he loved you. Daniel laughed bitterly. That isn't love. Rachel said nothing. Sophie walked toward another machine. She pointed at a small slot. There. Lily stepped closer. What's that? A memory cartridge. Daniel frowned. A what? Rachel explained. Project Echo didn't just record genetic information. It recorded memories. Daniel looked at Sophie. You mean they could store memories? Yes. How? Rachel pointed toward Sophie's head. Through her.
The little girl stood in the doorway. She was barefoot, her hair was wet, and she was staring at Daniel as if she had been waiting for him for years. Daniel couldn't move. Emily couldn't breathe. Lily slowly stepped forward. The girl looked at her. You came back. Lily stopped. Do I know you? The girl shook her head. No. Then she looked at Daniel again. But he does. Daniel's voice trembled. What's your name? The girl hesitated. Then she whispered, Grace. Rachel suddenly covered her mouth. Daniel looked at her. You know her. Rachel didn't answer. Rachel. She looked at Daniel with tears in her eyes. Yes. Who is she? Rachel whispered. Subject 006. Daniel felt his stomach drop. The photograph. 6 children. 4 failed. 1 survived. But there had been a 6th. Grace. Daniel stepped closer. How old are you? 8. When were you born? October 14th. Daniel's eyes widened. Which you? Grace stared at him. 2018. Daniel couldn't speak. Lily looked at Emily. Sophie was still unconscious in Daniel's arms. Rachel slowly walked toward Grace. Where have you been? Grace pointed toward the hallway. Downstairs. Rachel looked toward the hidden elevator. There is no downstairs.
Grace smiled. That's what Grandpa says. Daniel froze. Grandpa? Grace nodded. Thomas. Daniel's heart began pounding. Thomas Reed? Grace nodded. He's my grandfather. Emily stepped backward. No. Grace looked at her. Your grandma, Emily. Emily started crying. Daniel looked at his wife. You knew? Emily shook her head violently. No. Grace smiled sadly. Grandma doesn't remember me. Daniel stared at the girl. How do you know us? Grace looked confused. Because I've been watching. Watching what? You. Daniel's blood ran cold. How long? Grace raised 8 fingers. Since I was little. Daniel almost laughed. You're 8. Grace nodded. I know. Then she said something that made everyone silent. I watched you sleep. Emily screamed. Daniel immediately stepped between Grace and his family. Who taught you to do that? Grace looked toward the ceiling. Grandpa. Daniel clenched his fists. Where is he? Grace pointed behind herself. He's here. Daniel turned. Nobody was there. Then the lights went out. A man's voice filled the room. You finally met her. Daniel knew the voice. His father. Come out. A laugh echoed. I've been here the entire time. Daniel looked around. Where? The voice answered. Inside the house. Daniel froze. The house. His house. Project Echo. Everything was connected. The voice continued. Grace is the only child who remembers the original experiment. Daniel looked at the girl. What experiment? Grace looked at him. The first one? Rachel whispered. Daniel? He turned. What? Rachel's face was pale. Your father didn't invent Project Echo. Daniel stared at her. What? He inherited it. From whom? Rachel hesitated. Your grandfather. Daniel's heart stopped. My grandfather. Rachel nodded. Your father's father. Daniel remembered almost nothing about his grandfather. He had died when Daniel was very young. He was a scientist. A quiet man. A man Daniel remembered as kind. Rachel continued. He was one of the first people to study memory preservation. Daniel looked at Grace. Then what happened? Rachel said. Your grandfather discovered something. What? Human memory isn't stored only in the brain. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? Memories can influence the body. How? Through biological signals. Daniel stared. Rachel continued. Your grandfather believed that certain genetic patterns could preserve memory beyond normal limits. Sophie slowly opened her eyes. That's what I remember. Everyone turned. Sophie sat up. I remember Grandpa. Daniel stared at her. You've met him? She nodded. When I was little, Daniel felt dizzy. Where? In the house. What house? Our old house. Daniel froze. Their old house had burned down. Sophie continued. He came into my room. What did he say? He said I was special. Daniel's voice shook. Did he hurt you? She shook her head. No. He asked me questions. What questions? If I remembered before I was born. Daniel stared. What did you say? I said yes. Silence. Then Grace spoke. I remember too. Daniel looked at her. What? Before I was born. Everyone became silent. Daniel knelt. What do you remember? Grace looked at him. Mom. Your mother. Grace nodded. She was crying. Where? In a room. What room? Grace pointed downward. The room where they made us. Daniel's blood turned cold. Made you. Grace nodded. We weren't all born naturally. Lily stepped forward. What do you mean? Grace looked at her. You were. But some of us weren't. Daniel stared at the girl. Who wasn't? Grace pointed toward herself. Me. Then she pointed at Sophie. Her. Sophie nodded. Daniel's face went pale. You're saying you were created? Grace nodded. From genetic material? Whose? Grace looked at Daniel. Yours. The room became silent. Daniel stared at her. No. Grace whispered. You're my father. Daniel shook his head. That's impossible. Grace nodded. Grandpa said the same thing. Daniel looked toward Rachel. Rachel's eyes were filled with tears. Is it true? Rachel nodded. Yes. I couldn't breathe. How? Rachel explained. Your father conveyed the genetic material when you were young. When? After the first experiment. What first experiment? The one that caused your memory loss. Daniel closed his eyes. The memories returned. A laboratory. His father. Michael. A woman screaming. A baby. A machine. A needle. A glass chamber. Then a number. 1. Daniel opened his eyes. I was the first. Rachel nodded. Yes. And Grace. 006. Daniel looked at Sophie. And her. 005. Lily stepped forward. Then what am I? Rachel looked at her. 004. Daniel stared at Lily. Then who are the others? Rachel's face became pale. 002 and 003 didn't survive. Daniel looked at Grace. Why were you created? Grace answered before Rachel could. To see if memory could be inherited. Daniel stared. Did it work? Grace smiled. Yes. She pointed at Sophie. She remembers. Then herself. I remember. Then Lily. She remembers too. Lily shook her head. I don't remember anything. Grace smiled. Not yet. Suddenly the walls began vibrating. A deep mechanical hum filled the facility. Rachel looked at the monitors. No. Daniel asked. What? The system is restarting. Samuel's voice came through the radio. Daniel, listen to me. Daniel grabbed it. Samuel, you need to leave immediately. Why? Because Thomas has activated the original protocol. What protocol? The inheritance protocol. Rachel turned white. What is that? Samuel answered. If the system detects all surviving subjects in one location, it automatically begins the final transfer. Daniel looked at Grace. What transfer? Memory. Whose? Everyone's. Daniel stared at the screens. Names began appearing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then another number. 7. Daniel's heart stopped. There's another one. Rachel stared. No. Who is 007? The screen changed. A photograph appeared. Daniel recognized the face. His own. But younger. Much younger. Then another photograph appeared. A baby. Then another. A woman. Then another. A hospital room. Rachel whispered. No. Daniel looked at her. What? 007 wasn't a child. What was it? Rachel stared at the screen. 00.
The phone remained in Daniel's hand long after the call had ended. Nobody spoke. The underground facility was completely silent. Not peaceful. Silent in the way a forest becomes silent just before a storm. Daniel looked at Samuel. What did you mean? Samuel didn't answer. Daniel stepped closer. You said Subject 008 was never born. Samuel swallowed. I thought she wasn't. But she just called me. I know. She called me Dad. I heard her. Then who is she? Samuel looked toward Rachel. Rachel was staring at the floor. Rachel. She slowly raised her head. Daniel.
Tell me. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. I don't know. Daniel stared at her. You know something. I know what the files say. What do they say? Rachel took a breath. Subject 008 was created in 1999. Daniel froze. 1999? Yes. That's 27 years ago. Rachel nodded. Exactly. But Sophie is 12. Lily is 22. And Grace is 8. Yes. Daniel shook his head. Then how can Subject 008 be 27? Rachel looked at him. Because she wasn't created as a child. Daniel didn't understand. What was she created as? Rachel whispered. An adult. Silence. Daniel felt a cold sensation move through his body. That's impossible. Rachel shook her head. Not anymore. Samuel walked toward the control panel. We need to leave. Daniel didn't move. No. Daniel, not until I know who she is. Samuel looked at him. If we stay here, they'll find us. Who? Samuel didn't answer. Daniel shouted. Who? A distant metallic sound echoed through the facility. Everyone turned. Something was moving inside the walls. Slowly. Heavy footsteps. Rachel whispered. They're here. Daniel looked toward the corridor. Who? Samuel raised his weapon. The cleanup team. Daniel frowned. Whose? Samuel looked at him. Yours. Daniel's face went blank. My what? Samuel's voice became quiet. Your father's. The lights came on. A red warning symbol appeared on every monitor. Then the doors opened. 5 people entered. They were wearing plain black clothing. No badges. No insignia. No visible weapons. The man in front looked at Daniel. Mr. Carter. Daniel stepped forward. Who are you? The man smiled. We're here to take you home. I don't have a home. The man looked around. You do. He pointed upward. You're standing inside it. Daniel stared. What does that mean? The man didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Sophie. She's coming with us. Daniel immediately stepped in front of her. No. The man's expression didn't change. That's not a request. Samuel raised his weapon. The man sighed. Samuel. Samuel froze. The stranger smiled. You've been running for a very long time. Samuel's hands tightened around his weapon. Not tonight. The man looked at him. You're not the guardian anymore. Daniel frowned. What? The man pointed toward Daniel. He is. Daniel looked confused. What are you talking about? The man said. Your father left you something. What? Authority. Daniel stared. Authority over what? The man smiled. Everything. Then he pulled a small metal card from his pocket. He threw it onto the floor. Daniel picked it up. There was no name, only a number. 1. And beneath it, Administrator. Daniel looked at Samuel. What is this? Samuel whispered. The master key. Daniel looked at the card. I don't want it. You don't get to choose. The lights flickered. A voice came through the speakers. Daniel's father's voice. Yes, you do. Everyone froze. The cleanup team looked toward the ceiling. Daniel whispered. Dad. His father's voice answered. Take the card. Daniel shook his head. Why? Because you're the only person who can stop me. Daniel stared. Stop you? Yes. Then why are you giving me access? A long silence. Then his father answered. Because I know what happens next. The monitors turned on. A satellite image appeared. North America. Then the image zoomed. Thousands of red points appeared across the United States. Then Canada. Then Mexico. Daniel stared. What are those? His father's voice answered. Subjects. Daniel looked at the screen. 37,000. No. The number changed. 142,000. Daniel felt sick. How? Project Echo never stopped. Rachel whispered. It kept growing. Daniel looked at the screen. Where are they? His father answered. Everywhere. Children. Children. Adults. Adults. How many know? Almost none. Daniel stared at the map. Why? Because most of them don't know what they carry. Daniel understood. The genetic marker. The memory trait. The biological inheritance. The project had been operating silently for decades. The database wasn't just a list. It was a network. Every hospital. Every insurance company. Every genetic testing service. Every medical record. Every DNA sample. Connected. Daniel looked at Sophie. Why did they need her? His father's voice answered. Because she can access the original architecture. Sophie stepped forward. You're afraid of me. Silence. Then, yes. Sophie smiled. Good. The cleanup team looked at her. The leader whispered. She's 12. Rachel answered. That's what makes her dangerous. Daniel grabbed Sophie's hand. We're leaving. The man blocked his path. You can't. Daniel held up the metal card. The man's face changed. Daniel looked at him. Move. The man stepped aside. Daniel couldn't believe it. They walked down the corridor. Samuel followed. Lily followed. Emily and Rachel followed. Grace walked beside Sophie. Nobody stopped them. When they reached the elevator, Daniel looked at Samuel. Why did he give me control? Samuel said. Because he knows he's losing. Daniel pressed the button.
The elevator doors opened. Inside was a screen. It displayed a single question. Administrator 008. Authenticate. Daniel touched the screen. The system scanned his palm, then his eyes, then his face. A voice spoke. Identity confirmed. Daniel's name appeared. Daniel Carter. Then something unexpected happened. Another name appeared beneath it. Daniel Reed. Daniel froze. He stepped back. What? Emily stared. Lily looked at him. Sophie whispered, Reed. Rachel closed her eyes. Daniel looked at her. Tell me. Rachel shook her head. Not here. Tell me. She finally answered. Your father's last name wasn't Carter. Daniel's heart pounded. Then what was it? Reed. Daniel stared. Thomas Reed. No. Rachel looked at him. Your father was Jonathan Reed. Daniel's face went white. Jonathan Reed. Rachel nodded. Thomas was his brother. Silence. Daniel suddenly understood. Thomas wasn't just a scientist. He was family. His father's brother, Daniel's uncle, and the entire Project Echo network had been built by two brothers. One wanted immortality. The other wanted to stop him. But both had used Daniel. The elevator began descending. Daniel looked at Samuel. Why didn't you tell me? Samuel answered. Because you weren't ready. Ready for what? To learn that the man who saved your family was also the man who helped create the system hunting you. Daniel stared at him. What? Samuel looked away. I worked for Jonathan. Daniel froze. You worked for my father? Yes. For how long? 7 years. Then why did you turn against him? Samuel looked at Daniel. Because he asked me to. Daniel frowned. What? Your father knew Thomas would eventually take control. He knew the project would become dangerous. So he created a second plan. What plan? Me. Daniel stared. Samuel continued. I was supposed to protect you. Your family. Lily. Sophie. Everyone. Daniel whispered. Then why did you disappear? Samuel looked at him. Because Jonathan told me to. Why? Because Thomas was watching. Daniel stared. Samuel's voice broke. If I stayed near you, Thomas would know you were alive. So I became the stranger. Daniel finally understood. Samuel hadn't simply appeared at their door. He had been there all along. At a distance. Watching. Protecting. Waiting. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. They stepped into an enormous underground parking facility. Hundreds of vehicles were parked there. Daniel stared. This is under our town. Samuel nodded. Under the entire county. Daniel looked at the walls. How old is this? 27 years. Rachel whispered. Jonathan built it after the first experiment. Daniel looked at her. Why? To hide the survivors. Daniel stopped. Survivors. Rachel nodded. Not all the children were experiments. What do you mean? Some were rescued. By whom? Jonathan. Daniel stared. His father had been both creator and protector. Monster and savior. The contradiction was becoming impossible to understand. Then Grace spoke. He's not dead. Everyone turned. Daniel looked at her. Who? My grandfather. Jonathan. Grace shook her head. No. Thomas. Daniel frowned. Thomas is a digital consciousness. Grace shook her head. The real one is alive too. The room went silent. Samuel whispered. Impossible. Grace looked at him. I saw him. When? Yesterday. Where? Grace pointed toward the ceiling. In the house. Daniel felt cold. The Carter house. Grace nodded. He was sitting in Dad's chair. Daniel stared. What did he say? Grace looked at him. He said he was proud of you. Daniel's chest tightened. Then he said something else. What? He said the family reunion wasn't complete. Daniel looked at Lily. Then Sophie. Then Grace. What is missing? Grace looked directly at Daniel. You. Daniel frowned. I'm here. Grace shook her head. Not this Daniel. What do you mean? The first Daniel. Rachel stepped backward. No. Daniel looked at her. What is the first Daniel? She whispered. The original memory. Daniel understood. The memory stored inside him. The one his father erased. The one Thomas wanted. The one Sophie could access. The one that contained the beginning of Project Echo. Daniel suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head. He fell to his knees. Images flooded his mind. A laboratory. A young Jonathan. A young Thomas. His grandfather. A little boy. Daniel. 3 years old. A machine. A glass chamber. And then another image. A woman. Daniel's mother. She was holding a newborn baby. A little girl. I heard her whisper. Her name is Anna. Lily. Then another baby. Sophie. Then another. Grace. Then another. A baby girl with dark hair. Sarah. Daniel gasped. 4 daughters. Not 3. 4. Lily. Sophie. Grace. Sarah. But Sarah had never appeared in any record. Daniel opened his eyes. Sarah. Everyone froze. Rachel whispered. Who told you that name? Daniel looked at her. My mother. Rachel's face changed. That's impossible. Why? Because Sarah was subject 008. I remembered. She survived. Rachel shook her head. No. She survived. No. Where is she? Rachel looked at the floor. She died. Daniel stood. When? 27 years ago. Rachel couldn't answer. Grace suddenly whispered, "She didn't die." Daniel turned.